Welcome to another episode of the Wealthy Podcast. I'm your host, Shauna Nairos. Do you skip, run, jump, hop, stretch, play sports, swing a racket, a bat? If you do, wonderful. That's physical literacy. But for many of us, physical literacy is not something we think about every day. It's more than just playing in sports or being physically fit. It's having the skills in our toolbox to be able to move with confidence and sustainably throughout the duration of our lives. And many of these skills, just like our ABCs, we are meant to learn when we're young. But for many of us, that journey might start a little later. Today, I am joined by Drew Mitchell, who is the Senior Director of Physical Literacy at Sport for Life. And Drew is doing amazing, amazing work. I just was so engaged by this whole conversation. I might as well just not have even had notes. Anybody who is interested in health must listen to this episode. There are so many useful nuggets of information that Drew shares, as well as what we can be doing as a community to advance and advocate for more physical literacy for our children and our next generations. You're going to want to listen up. Today, we're talking about something that quietly shapes the way we move through the world, literally. But it's a term you might not have heard much about: physical literacy. This conversation is about how we build confidence in our bodies, how we develop the skills and awareness to move well and move often, and why that matters, not just for our physical health, but for our mental health, our relationships, our aging, and our communities. To help us break this down, I'm joined by Drew Mitchell, Senior Director of Physical Literacy at Sport for Life. Drew has spent decades working with organizations across Canada to embed physical literacy into sport, education, recreation, and healthcare. He's also leading a new locally focused initiative right here in the Central Okanagan in partnership with Thrive Okanagan and the KGH Foundation, naturally, bringing a multi-sector approach to increasing physical literacy and long-term well-being across the lifespan. So together, Drew and I plan to explore why physical literacy is different from being fit or sporty. And in that way, he's going to school me a little bit. How it develops from early childhood through older adulthood, and what happens when we ignore it, and at the personal level across society. We'll also talk about what it means to move with confidence, how physical literacy can protect against chronic disease and isolation, and why it might be one of the most important and most overlooked conversations in healthcare right now. Let's get at it. Welcome, Drew.
Nice to meet you, Shauna. Thank
nice
you very much.
Nice to meet you too. I'm so grateful to have you. We have a bit of an opening tradition on the podcast because everybody has a story. Everybody gets here having navigated and traveled their own path. And I'm curious, how did you end up specializing in physical literacy? Where did your sort of early experience with health or healthcare, where did those come from, and how did they inform how you chose kind of your life path?
Have we got a couple hours? No, I'm just kidding. I was very fortunate. I was a free range kid. You know, in my time, we had full access to our neighborhood. Unlike what happens today, we were miles from home, making up our own games, climbing trees, getting into various levels of trouble, lots of our own decision making as we went by. Got introduced to sport when I got into the school system and dabbled at that for a while, trying to find my way, sampling as they call it.
Mm-hmm.
And then got intrigued with some sports, did well enough that I competed for our country at a world championships in one of them, which was great. And
what
had
sport?
That
You have to
canoe
tell
kayak.
us. Oh, cool.
Yep. And so was part of when we brought dragon boat racing to Canada, outrigger canoe racing to Canada, all of that was done largely under the leadership of Falls Creek Canoe Club in Vancouver. So it's been an interesting journey. And then probably most importantly, being a dad of 3 kids and watching that whole thing happen. I mean, I just became a grandpa on Sunday.
Congratulations.
So, yeah, baby
Yay.
Margot, 8 pounds. Going to go see her tomorrow in Ottawa. And so when you have your own kids, it's like you have your own experiment, right? I coach them in sport. I made them walk to school.
Oh my God.
All that evil
Bare
stuff.
feet uphill in the
oh,
snow.
Yeah.
Totally.
Totally awful. And so it really opened my eyes. And then my ex-wife is actually she went to medical school when we first got married, and so I've been immersed in the health space since. And then in one of my jobs, I actually managed the science and medicine program for 30 national teams and 30 provincial teams. So I've been kind of immersed in working with primary care, allied care for a long time. So it's I've sort of walked the walk and not just talked the talk for most of my life.
Yeah. It's interesting, how you were describing sort of being a free range kid. It kind of brought me back a little bit to my childhood as well. I grew up in Langley, which if you're from the Lower Mainland, you're familiar with that area, on an acreage, and we had a creek in the back. And my friends and I, even like into our teenage years, would go back there and just like get lost. Like we would just go and
for hours and hours.
And I remember coming home one day, and my friend and I came home, and we got in trouble. My stepdad was so mad. He's like, "What have you been doing out there?" And we're like, "Well, we just made up this game, and we were doing all of these things and just wandering around, and we had this whole world that we had made up, and we just completely lost track of time." And he was so like, "You can't, like,
you can't
do you
that.
know how long you've been out there?" Like, he didn't say you can't do that, but I just think, wow, you know what? I haven't thought about that memory for a while.
Yeah.
And also just what you said about your children. I have 2 children that are now kind of like getting into another season of their lives, heading off to university and such. Yeah. And I just think, like, I don't know if I would have even let it get that far, where they would just wander off for hours and I wouldn't know where they were, and they didn't have a phone. And I think that's kind of why this conversation matters even more now, right? Because the way that we live and the way our kids are growing up has changed so much, right?
It has. I mean, a whole bunch of things have happened. I think in our neighborhoods, I think with the advent of 24-hour media, 24-hour news, Amber Alert, I think we have a level of surplus safety that's been put into our communities.
Right.
Everybody, I think, not everybody, but a large number of people feel the white panel van is around the corner. It's going to take or harm my kid.
Totally.
Yeah. So statistically, 1 in 14 million chance that your child will be abducted by a stranger, RCMP statistics. It's an interesting dynamic because just like you shared, we all had that freedom, yet we didn't give it to our kids. And so this has been sort of that contraction over time, right? And so now what's happened is, because of that organic piece now being largely gone, you still see the occasional cul-de-sac where kids are out there playing street hockey or whatever they're doing and playing games. It's not the norm.
No.
And so things have to be programmatic now. Everything has to be programmed. There has to be a program going on. Yeah.
With a first aid attendant.
And it puts pressure on our systems, probably mostly on our schools with kids. Our schools are really not, in BC, we don't have phys ed specialists in the elementary space. You do come across schools that do either have somebody who's got their own set of skills and is platooning with other teachers and makes it happen, or our principal's been a little bit innovative and they've used different timing, and they get somebody in who can actually do that. So you do see it here and there. But it does put a lot of pressure on the system to do things differently. And then, you've got a real blend of cultures. happening now, and some cultures are not as open to it's academics, you shouldn't be doing that. It's a waste of your time.
Right.
And
Different
everything.
priorities.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, it's different strokes for different folks. You need to figure out what's going to work. But a lot of our work is built around trying to make system change. And if we get good systems in place, because, Sean, as an example, you may be working in the recreation space and I may be working in the school, and we know each other. And so we try and do some stuff together because we know each other. But then, your job changes, you move on to something else. What happens?
New person, doesn't know you, doesn't maybe sort of subscribe
Generally
to
all
the same.
stops.
Yeah.
So there's no systematic component to it. So how do we build systems that actually, regardless of whether you and I are involved, still happen? How do we build movement over the whole school day? Because we look at the research around physical activity as an example, and I'll use physical activity as an overarching term for sport, exercise, dance, performing arts, work, right? Like
movement.
It all fits in there. And what we see is when you do physical activity, a lot of really great stuff happens. Your brain gets activated, your hormones are flowing in a different way. We use movement in a lot of ways to socially connect with others. It's one of the main ways as humans that we do that. What COVID taught us is two things happened, big things, I think. When you don't have enough physical activity and you're not connected to people on a regular basis, bad stuff happens.
Right.
And it did.
Yeah.
So now we have a circumstance around this, we're worried about our kids, that generation of kids and their mental health, their confidence, how they feel about themselves. My youngest daughter was at the University of Toronto at the time, real social kid. Didn't do well in the online world, which is a little unusual in her generation.
It is, but it's not. I've heard that over and over again.
She got into a little bit of trouble and we managed to help her, get out of it and stuff. But, here's a kid who's on the honors list and does really well and everything else. And because she didn't have that regular connection to people and wasn't physically active during that time, she suffered for it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's an interesting time.
It is. Have you read that book? So many things of what you're talking about remind me of this book, The Anxious Generation.
Oh, yeah.
Jonathan
I
Haidt.
have not read it.
Oh, I'm sure people will keep, because a lot of the themes that you're talking about, this sort of
I own two of them.
Oh, okay. Oh, yeah. Do you know what?
Oldest daughter, youngest daughter.
Yeah. And I do too, right? And interestingly, what you're talking about is sort of like this combination of like over surveillance and then this just completely overwhelming attachment to screens out of nowhere has really had a detrimental impact. And I would argue as well, that book focuses on the impact on kids.
Yeah.
But I would also argue that the impact on adults is equally concerning.
100%. And I think we have to remember, and we see this, we do a lot of work in the child and youth space and a lot of work in the older adult space, no different.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
They want to be socially accepted. They want to be part of something. They want to be engaged.
Yeah.
They want to have their own level of independence and be able to move, because what's the first thing we want our kids to do? Walk. What's the last thing we want to lose? Walk. Right. And so it is very important for us as humans.
Okay.
To be able to have that.
I feel like you and I could talk about this for hours. I just love it. I'm drinking the Kool-Aid 100%. This conversation is about physical literacy. And so I think it's really valuable. What are we talking? What is physical literacy? Like your definition, you define it. Sure. And how is it different from just like being fit or athletic?
Yeah. Interesting you say that. Being fit and athletic is basically an outcome of being more physically literate.
Right.
So, probably the best way to compare it is we understand as a society, in our Western society, we understand literacy. When we learn how to read and write and we develop a diverse and broad vocabulary, We have more confidence. We can make our way through life. We understand what's going on. It's so entrenched in our society that with our kids, before they go to bed, what do we do with them? We read with them.
Right.
Right? It's reading homework we do with our kids. So learning your ABCs, and then with math, your 1, 2, 3s, you need that foundational piece, right? Those are the building blocks to be able to form words and build sentences and form paragraphs.
And even how you think.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So numeracy and literacy, you have to be taught, you have to learn it, and you have to practice. So physical literacy is no different. No different. You have to be taught, you have to learn, and you have to practice. And what's happened is we're not teaching enough, we're not learning enough, and we're definitely not practicing enough. And because of that, we have a deficiency in our population on having what I call confident movers. If we don't have a level of confidence, if we can do something, if we have certain skills. So again, would you ever teach half the alphabet?
No.
Probably not.
Not useful.
But we do that with the whole bucket of skills all the time. I'm going to give you 4 or 5 skills and you're good.
Right.
And then you're expected to kind of make it through life. Versus if I have a plethora of skills that allow me to do lots of different things, I have options. And when I have options, I have choice. And when I have choice, I have more happiness at the end of the day, because I can do a diverse level of things. I'm not restricted. I have fewer barriers. And it's fascinating because I think as parents with kids, we worry about our kids. Are they going to fit in? Are they going to be okay?
What if they're not sporty? I hear that one a lot.
Absolutely. And you know what? You really bring up a good point about that. Movement, like sport, is one of the ways that we move. And, it's well publicized at the pro level, and it's, it sucks up a lot of oxygen. And, most recently, if you've been watching CBC, you see Summer McIntosh.
Yes. Kicking
the ass out of a pool on a regular basis, right? Yeah. Like she's an amazing human being. Yeah. And what she's showing is over time, you can do some pretty amazing things. But the majority of the population, they just want to get by, right? So how do we help people reach their own level of mastery in movement? Mm-hmm. And so, not everybody's going to be a world champion. Not everybody's going to, be able to play tennis. But what the bottom line is, if we ensure that our population at least has a reasonable level, a foundation, then I think we give them a fighting chance. And I think focusing in on kids, like I kind of look at 1 to 10 or 12, that's kind of the sweet spot. 1 to 5 is probably the greatest time because their brain is so ready to suck stuff up and they'll do anything. Right? Mm-hmm. You're going to get less pushback. As they get older, it becomes more difficult, as we're finding out now, as your children age. But it's just very, very interesting. And what I find is we have deprioritized this. For some reason, somewhere along the way, somebody determined that it wasn't so important. Mm-hmm. That in the school system, as an example, with academics and education, numeracy and literacy are the priority. You need to know that. And I'm sitting there going, well, long-term health is a priority too, and if I can move and everything else, I'm going to keep this thing moving and I'm going to be pretty good. The other thing that's happened is we've disconnected mind and body. So in the education system, we're focused on the mind and making that happen. And we've really disconnected it from the physical. And what that's done is, I think it's actually some of the basis to some of the mental health issues that we have. We're not taking a holistic look at this very well. So we need to be looking at ways that we can actually bring the two together. If you look at mental health, a lot of the mental health support is built around a reactionary system. I'm in trouble. Where do I go? I need help. Instead, and that's important. Mm-hmm. Don't get me wrong. But where's the building of psychological wellness? Where is the building of resilience? Where are we being more proactive? Why don't we have this stuff embedded in our schools? Why don't we have foundationally movement as a strategy to support positive and physical mental well-being. It's
And
like,
we used to.
oh, we did.
Like, I remember, what was it called when, oh man, I'm going to totally like date myself, but our audience is going to totally know what I'm talking about. You know, when you, every year you
Canada
would
Standardized Test of Fitness.
yes. And you'd get the badges.
Scarred
and
a
the
lot of
things.
people.
I know it scarred. I mean,
Especially
it probably,
women.
I know it probably
Women
wasn't
and girls.
perfect because it was probably built for men or boys.
Well, it was.
Yeah. But
Male exercise physiologists created it. It was
right.
really-
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, so, but it still was embedded within, you were talking about the system.
Yeah.
I have so many things. It was embedded in the system. And so regardless of whether it was flawed, there was still this emphasis on.
Which badge did you have, Shauna? Come on.
Well, it depended, but I'm a bit competitive. So
Yeah.
I got silver quite often, not always gold, but I aspired to that. It was the only time I think I ever tried to do a chin up or
Flex arm hang.
have tried to do it since. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But now I'm learning like, jeepers, I should have stuck with that because like those hangs are so incredibly good for you. Mm-hmm. Anyway, I digress. Because there's so much in what you're saying, and even the separation of mind and body. I mean, I'm my yoga teacher is showing here, but this notion that you can divorce the two and still be optimal in learning is again, I think there's more and more evidence showing that is like a flawed model.
Yeah, if we're looking at health, I'll just use the term singularly, and we're looking at long-term health and the organism, our body, you can't go without it.
Mm-hmm.
And we are creating a society that is a bit more adverse to it, which is, mechanization's happening. Lots of different things are happening. Fair enough. This thing changed a lot of things, but this is not the
phone.
problem.
Yeah.
Adults are the problem. Adults made all those decisions to change the circumstance we talked about earlier.
Totally.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
They are the ones that say, Johnny, you can't go running out the door like I did when I was a kid. No, I'm not comfortable with that.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a behavioral issue, right? This is all behavioral. And how do we actually feel about getting people to function in a different way, to believe in a different way, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, even with my kids who are now 29, 27, 23, growing up in a very kiddie neighborhood, like lots of kids, we would walk to school. It was like pulling teeth, get other parents to get their kids to do it.
To
right?
like walk to school.
Oh yeah. Just to walk to school.
Yeah.
So, it's very, very interesting. Culture's it's a strong pull.
Well, and this is why I appreciate the work that you're doing, because it just got away from us. I don't think it was like, it just sort of snuck off. Yeah. And so you talked about the parallels between sort of, reading and writing and that our common understanding what literacy means and how that can be directly related to physical literacy.
Yeah.
Okay, this wasn't on my list of questions, but I have to ask you, like, what are the ABCs of physical literacy?
So it's interesting. Physical literacy is really broken into a number of couple different categories. So we think of the physical always, right? Fundamental movement skills, hopping, skipping, jumping, which we would call locomotor skills. Okay. We're moving our body around on the ground. It's generally on our feet, and in the water, we are moving in the water. We're moving on the snow. We're moving on the ice. There's lots of different ways.
Like just moving, like some sort of
That's
movement.
Locomotor skills.
Yeah.
Okay. We are moving our body around. Non-locomotor skills. So those are things like balance, coordination, and agility, right? So how do we manage our body in sort of a non-movement status, right? And then the most exciting part is object manipulation skills. I get to do stuff with my hands and my feet and my head, and I have objects. I have balls
like
and
a
chickens.
racket. Chickens.
Yeah. You've never seen a rubber chicken being thrown around? Oh, okay. Come on. Where you been? And how do you think those kids? How do you think that, those kids do well in beer pong? Come on, it's like it's a thing.
Quarters. It was quarters back in my day.
Yeah. We're all doing that for sure. But it's interesting because those three categories of skills, they are the nexus of movement. Now, a lot of those are kind of sporty in nature.
Right.
So there's a lot of other skills like rolling and waddling and like, different things that you can do that really expand the horizon of a kid.
Like even just, I'm thinking as you're talking about creative ways to start thinking about physical literacy that isn't attached to sports, because like I get Absolutely. It. Not everybody wants to not every kid wants to run around with a bunch of other kids and chase a little ball down a field or a puck or whatever. Yep. Like I get that. Yep. But like you're talking about balance, right? Like walking across a log on a creek.
Yeah. In the woods.
In the woods.
In the green space.
Right?
How many of our kids are not in the green space, right? And take a moment with that as well. Think about it. So this generation and probably the previous generation and generations in front, they are not experiencing the green space like we did.
Yeah.
And they are going to be the leaders of that green space eventually. And if they don't prioritize it or they don't value it, that's a problem. Mm-hmm. And so getting out in the green space, and again, you read that, outdoor deficit disorder is a thing. You can Google it. You can read the books on it. It's, I think we're very fortunate in Canada. Most spaces have reasonable access to green space. Mm-hmm. We think about how lovely the Okanagan is.
Right. We have an abundance of it here.
We do.
Yeah.
I mean, we don't have as much forest because we are the northern desert.
Right.
But, as say Northwest Ontario. But the bottom line is that we have lots of, I think of the number of trails that are everywhere.
Yeah.
It's incredible, right?
Yeah.
Just incredible, whether you're on your bike or hiking or whatever you're doing. So there's lots of ways to get out and move around and explore the world and experience the world that don't involve sport.
And practice that physical literacy.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And extrapolate that to, say your older age and what is one of the biggest worries with older adults? Falling.
Yeah.
Right. So, there's been lots of different approaches to falls prevention. What is it? Do we just get them to not move? Right.
Yeah.
Or do we teach them how to move better? Or do we teach them how to fall? Right? Like there's lots of different ways to approach this, but I think anybody who has their own level of competence and confidence around movement is probably going to fare better in the world, right? At the end of the day, you think about, again, resilience and durability. If somebody is fitter and has a certain level of strength and a certain level of flexibility, and they do experience an injury, they're going to be able to bounce back better. Mm-hmm. Versus somebody who's more frail, maybe on the frail scale and, further down that scale, who we know 20% of hip fractures that go into the hospital don't come out, mm-hmm. right? So we need to work on making our society more durable because with durability becomes versatility. Mm-hmm. We just become better in being able to interact with our society. We're better mentally because we're feeling better about ourselves, that we can do stuff. So it's all interrelated. But the real big change when we think about physical activity and then we extrapolate that to physical literacy, over time it was just the physical. That's just, we've been doing physical activity forever. People just do it. So think of mundane exercise. You're on the stair climber for forever, right?
Yeah.
And so that happens. But if you're not changing it up and you're not doing something different, the real secret sauce that makes physical literacy interesting is the social, emotional, and cognitive components. So on the social side, I'm using activity as a way to connect with others. So I'm not just doing it on my own, I'm doing it with others. So it could be cardiac rehab class. You know, I've had a cardiac incident, but now I'm with 20 other people. We're doing circuit training, we're interacting. I feel better, you know, I feel motivated to come to the class because I have these other people to do it with. You know, this is my support group, whatever way you want to label it. Bottom line is, social is such a big part of all of it. We wonder why running groups are successful. We wonder why riding groups are successful, because they are a group. And if we do venture into sport a little bit, one of the things about these groups, so a team sport, soccer, hockey, whatever, basketball, one of the things about being part of something and feeling included is you actually learn how to interact with others. And so it's life skills. You do develop those great life skills as you move along, right? So there is a benefit in many different ways. You learn how to manage your emotions better because you're interacting with people more often. And then cognitively, you learn why it's important to do this, and you start to figure out how you value it in your own way as you move along. And so the actual definition of physical literacy is the physical competence, the confidence, the motivation, the knowledge and understanding to take part in physical activity over the life course. So it's all those pieces that make the pie.
And I just think, wow, you have like such an interesting, you know, like your purpose, right? You're really embedded in this, and we're going to talk.
It's a cool job, I gotta say.
It's so cool. I'm just like it's the intersection, at least for me personally, and professionally. It's sort of like the intersection of healthcare, prevention, and promotion, and also the evolution of parenting and the whole understanding of that mind and body connection and how that helps us thrive. Like there's so many incredible opportunities there to just sort of like advance as human beings without being like too grandiose about it. So
but why, you know, why do we settle?
I know.
Why?
Yeah.
Why do we settle for okay?
Yeah.
Thriving's a good thing.
Yeah. I agree. I am curious. So you've alluded to the fact, well, you've said it straight out, that the best time to establish physical literacy is no different than when we teach our kids to read and write and compute math, you know, so young. What are we doing with, like, how are we facilitating this for our young people? Putting the conversation about system change aside for just a moment, because I do want to go there. But what can people do as parents and as grandparents or aunties, uncles, friends, whatever, anyone that has young children in their lives? What are we doing with those kids?
Well, part of the challenge is parents are busy. In our society today. So, and I look at that and I go, okay, I extrapolate it back to when I was a kid. My parents weren't doing anything. Think about it. Like, they weren't with us.
No.
We don't
They
want
literally
them around.
were just like, go
right?
outside and play.
That's been an interesting dynamic. You know, as a family, you need to do things. Well, that's complicated and hard. So, but, you know, that services the safety part, right?
Yeah.
Because now we have a family unit working together. I'm not worried about the safety thing anymore. So how do we empower any people, kids, whatever, to be motivated and to be confident to do what they want to do, right? So how do we create opportunities for them? And it's interesting. So in childcare, you know, does your childcare, if you're using childcare, what does your childcare facility do on the physical side? Do they go outside? Do they have how much activity do they have? There are standards in BC. Physical literacy is actually embedded in early childcare structure,
curriculum,
as far as the mandate goes. Whether sites do it is another story, right? That's always the challenge. And so it's a little all over the map in the early childcare space. School, as I mentioned already, we've destructured it by we've deprioritized physical and health education now. So it's become less a thing. But we've been doing lots of work in school spaces over the last number of years, helping the generalist teacher prioritize movement over the whole school day. So how do we build movement into the classroom? How do we build movement in the hallway when you're moving from class to class? What does recess and lunch look like? What does going to school look like? What does coming home from school look like, right? All those different things. And parents, if they, some parents get involved, they're on the pack at school, or they're coaching their kids in sport, or they're taking their kids to the rec center, or the Boys and Girls Club, or the YMCA, right? Whatever they're doing, they're helping that happen. So I think parents need to be engaged, like anything. And that doesn't mean that, they have to have their kids in 5 sports and all the time. That's not what I'm saying. But if their child has a reasonable bout of physical activity every day, you're increasing their chances that Johnny or Janie will do things. And part of what has to happen in that physical activity situation is they need to learn skills. Because if they don't learn those skills, if they're just running around, then listen, I tell you not to lie. That's what happens in certain circumstances because they're blowing off steam, right?
Yeah, they've got excess energy.
Exactly. They're running around the room being a little crazy. And that's fine.
Yeah.
But what skill have I learned there?
Right.
And so it is incumbent upon us as adults, especially with kids or even other adults or older adults, that we're ensuring that there is a learning opportunity that's happening. So if skill development is happening and it's progressive over time, then things will continue because that's it. Basically, everybody has a physical literacy journey. Sometimes my journey's really positive. I'm going along. And then sometimes it's not. I got really busy at work or school. I can't be as active. It's dropping off. Sometimes it's, I'm with a really I've got a really good group of friends. We all like to do stuff together. Oh, this is great, right? Oh, I'm at university now. I got no time to do that, right? So, or I'm having a baby. Oh, geez, that's changing my whole. So it is very cyclical over your lifespan.
However, I think what you're saying is if we start to develop that physical literacy from a very young age with our kids, those habits, let's call them, commitments, priorities, whatever, will continue despite the ebbs and flows of life. There's still that commitment to physical literacy, because at the end of the day, I know for me, it's like I feel so much better. It's like you said, it's the confidence, it's the mental health benefits, even sort of, the aesthetic benefit of just staying healthy and fit is enough of an incentive for a lot of people, but there's so many more benefits.
Well, and remembering, I use the term physical activity. Any type of physical activity you do, you generally get a fitness benefit.
Yeah.
So depending on what you're doing, the outcome is you get fitter.
Yeah.
And the more of it you do, and maybe the more intense you are, or depending on the activity and the type of activity, you will receive that benefit back. And if we know that, if you have a reasonable fitness level, your blood pressure tends to be lower. Your heart rate tends to be lower. You tend to have less body weight. Like all these things run together, right? Eating is a big part of this as well. So we need to manage that. But the bottom line is, with physical activity, we understand that we have to get out there and do it. I liken it to, people try and compare it to, say, smoking cessation. Smoking cessation, what you're trying to do is get somebody to stop doing something. So you can put lots of barriers and restrictions and everything else. It's the total opposite of physical activity. I'm trying to get you to do something.
Right.
So how do I create the circumstance for you to actually do that? So I compare it more to recycling. What happened with recycling? How'd that happen? Really good marketing campaign. Really mobilize young people to get older people, like kids going home and saying to their parents, we need to recycle.
Totally.
Right? That's the kind of strategy we have to have around physical activity, because we need to get momentum going, right? We need to, and then establish policy, and we start to change the circumstance a little bit.
I think you've touched on something that's really interesting as well. This idea of health promotion. And, there's all sorts that is wrapped into that from a funding priority perspective.
Yeah.
But this idea that physical literacy must feel accessible and inclusive.
Yep.
Like recycling.
Yeah.
Right? Like recycling is
Anybody can
accessible
do
and
it.
inclusive
Anybody
for
can do it.
everybody.
Yeah.
And I think that's where we've maybe gotten off the tracks a bit, is that people think like physical literacy equals my kid plays hockey or my kid is in football or swimming or what have you. And what I'm hearing you say is like, it's actually not. It's like the skills, sure, that you need to bounce a ball or shoot a puck, but it's also the skills of, hopping over a rock or walking over a tree branch,
dodging a car,
right? Like those kinds of skills as well. And as caregivers, parents, and people participating in the development of children, we can look for opportunities to make physical literacy, building those skills. Like I love what you said about, the locomotive and the, what's the second
non-locomotive?
Non-locomotive. Like, so like put the sports thing aside, because the kids that are into sports, they kind of just, they get it. They're drinking the Kool-Aid.
Yeah.
It's the ones that, maybe are less inclined.
Yeah. Well,
where
they're all,
you wanted.
I mean, think about it. You knew those kids that were good at math.
Totally.
And you knew those kids that were good at language arts. Well, there's also those kids who are good at moving.
Exactly.
And likewise, there's those kids who are not good at math, and there's those kids that are not as good as moving. And we have to create the opportunities for them to move.
Right.
And have more opportunity to move.
Yeah.
And that is part of the, if you use the law of thirds, about a third of the kids participate in some sort of sport in some sort of way. A third of the kids dabble, and a third of the kids, no connection. And my worry is actually that is starting to shift, that those bottom 2/3 is actually growing. It's becoming bigger. And that worries me because we're not creating opportunities. So as an example, in a community, health could fund free recreation programs. Why don't we do that?
Right.
That's health prevention right there.
Mm-hmm.
So a barrier to a lot of people is the cost to go to the facility. We could have free bus pass. Transportation is a barrier for people to be active. So how do we manage things in a different way? Maybe shift our priorities a little differently. I think we can do this differently. And we have to be brave enough to take some of these steps, because if we don't, we know insanity's the doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different outcome, right? And for the most part, we are kind of in that hamster wheel for the most part. Mm-hmm. Except the hamster wheel, you're doing some activity. So that I won't use that example.
Right. You're just standing.
The hamster's getting a little too fit.
You're literally just standing looking at the wheel.
Mind numbing. Yeah.
Fascinating work. I want to talk actually about what you're doing.
Sure.
You've done a really great job of outlining the challenge,
mm-hmm.
but also some of the opportunities that we have,
mm-hmm.
both individually and as a community,
yep.
And as a society,
mm-hmm.
because like it also applies at that macro level, especially when we talk about healthcare funding.
Yes.
So I've learned about you and the work of Sport for Life
mm-hmm.
because through our project, Thrive Okanagan, which is a project that the KGH Foundation funds to support basically like advancing mental health care in our community.
Yep.
This is one of the projects that we are funding.
Yep. You are.
Yes.
And thank you.
And like, it makes me so happy because it's really important. I think that people sometimes for a big challenge I have in my role as the communications lead is people still think the KGH Foundation is all about acute care and buying, equipment for the hospital, or maybe capital projects that, bigger footprint of the hospital. But like, these are the kinds of important projects that we're actually really curious and excited about that are being funded in community.
Yeah.
These are the things that move the needle on the health prevention and promotion
Absolutely
aspect that, we all know we can't keep going the way we're going.
No.
Acute care is absolutely necessary, and we need to ensure that we have the best possible acute care possible. And we also feel that we have a responsibility to promote ways that people can stay out of the hospital, for lack of a better rationale. What are you doing?
Let's
talk about what we're doing.
Well, it's interesting the way you've laid that out, Shauna. It's hospital foundations traditionally build stuff and buy stuff. That's what they do.
Absolutely.
Right? And it's been really interesting to see this shift that's happening, where how do we actually get the community to do a better job around the health of the citizenry? And I actually believe that most of the solutions live in the community already, but like we do in Canada all the time, we live in silos and we don't talk to each other. So a lot of different groups, well-meaning people doing great work, miss out on the opportunity to probably amplify and really, really extend that work because they don't work with others.
Right.
So we've taken a collective impact approach, working with Sheila Turner and Thrive, and it's been really great, to have this kind of support. And to also have this mental health focus, because I think a lot of people don't necessarily connect physical and mental near enough. But we're just early in the project. We've had 2 meetings, but we've got probably 20 organizations sitting at the table, which is awesome. And the whole idea is meet once a month, 90 minutes, in person. You got to look at somebody. You got to see other, how they fidget, how they move, and everything else. It makes a big difference.
Totally.
And over time, you start to get to know each other. You start to trust each other, and then you can start to plan together.
Mm-hmm.
And when you start planning together, the really great thing happens is you can actually start to act together. And ultimately, that is our end game. Is how do we actually get the community to function better? And if we do a better job on the prevention side, do we keep people out of the hospital, right? At the end of the day. And we were fortunate. We've been fortunate enough to work on a project down in South Surrey, White Rock called Move for Life, sponsored.
Great project.
Yeah, funded by the Peace Arch Hospital Foundation. And what's been really great about that is we've actually been able to get into working actually in the healthcare space. So we've actually got a walking program going on in the hospital with patients. And it's really an interesting dynamic. So these sorts of things can happen if people can be open to change. And what I'm excited about in the Central Okanagan is it's a pretty beautiful place to move.
Mm-hmm.
Right now it gets a little wintry, having come from the coast. My wife was a little surprised when we arrive here and there's a foot of snow in our front yard, right, from Port Moody.
But you don't need your umbrella.
That's a good point. And you know what? There's no moss. No moss anywhere. It's too damn hot.
Totally.
And you don't need to power wash your driveway. So it's just it's a different dynamic. But it's really interesting because when a community starts to come together and it starts to do things in a different way, you start to see the outcomes and you start to see how people connect better. In the sports side of things, one of the, you may have heard of sport councils or these different sport groups that come together and they'll work together in a community. And the reason I bring this up is it's an example of when a group of people that are like-minded, when they come together and they work together with the city and they look at allocation of facilities, because that's a big issue at the city level, or the building of new facilities. Well, I want our soccer pitch and I want our pool and I want, everybody wants. Well, if you come together and you work together and you prioritize these things, well, yeah, we really need a pool first. And so we're all going to get behind it.
Right. Coordinated.
Yeah. Versus, the soccer guys will kind of do an end around and they're only for, it becomes all for one for all kind of thing. So I think the collectivist approach has its strength. It's just hard because it's like herding cats sometimes. Totally.
And it's new.
Yeah.
And that's been one of the most interesting aspects of this. I'm happy you mentioned Sheila Turner, because she's been a driving force behind doing it this way, right? Yeah. Where recognizing that there are good, well-meaning organizations, interest groups in our community already trying to do all of this work, but it's all siloed and independent, and there's value in bringing people together. Yeah. And then, as you said, so eloquently laid out, there's value in bringing people together and working towards alignment, right? That doesn't mean that the soccer people get their thing and the swimming people get their thing, but it's like, what is our overall goal together? Yeah. And then how can we move towards that together? And that's such a mind shift, model shift from the way that, let's just say, healthcare is administered in Canada, right? Where it is quite siloed, like your cardiac people and your stroke people and there's, I think if you were to ask those clinicians, they would really appreciate a collective impact approach as well, but it takes time.
Yeah. Well,
and that's the other thing, is we're always sort of searching for, and even we do it too, because we're, responsible to our donors to communicate impact, right? Yeah. And it's well, we met twice, right? Wow, we're tired of meetings. But the thing is that you have to sort of believe that this is the path forward long-term sustainably.
Yeah. And it's important to understand that we kind of alluded to it earlier. It took us a long time to get here.
Totally.
It's going to take us a while to get out.
Yeah.
Right. And so this is not a short-term problem. It is a long-term problem. But I think we're starting to get some of the pieces in place that are going to help us with that pathway. And that's what's really great. It's funny, when I first met Sheila, we went and had coffee and and we're talking, and we found out that her brothers Tim and Pat were on the national rowing team when I was on the national canoeing team, and we were these guys were. Pat was one of my good buddies, and we were training the 84 Olympic trials. I'm going to be he's rowing, I'm paddling. And, we're we got the natural, competitive sport banter going on between the two sports, right? You guys are going backwards down the, all this sort of stuff. But it was funny, 6 degrees of separation is a thing.
Yeah.
It's so funny,
it's
right?
Awesome.
And so it's been really neat to sort of have that connection. And but it's been great to work with both Sheila and Melissa.
Yes.
Because they in our project with Southern White Rock, it's us by ourselves.
Right.
So it's nice to have things to bounce. Again, the team effect. 3 brains are better than one, and so it's been really refreshing. It's invigorated me because now I learn more, and it can't always be, do this. You got to sit back, you got to listen, you got to learn and evolve. And this is how we get better at the end of the day. And so, we're, like I say, we're in the very early days of this project. I really, it's exciting with the building of your new rec center, to be aligned with that. It's an active community. I think there's a lot of potential here.
Yeah.
A lot of potential.
I agree. It won't take, it's not We have a lot working for us.
Yep.
Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
If you had to, you've done a lot of work across Canada in this space, and recognizing that each community is unique. If you had to kind of prioritize in terms of your advocacy work, or let's say the areas of sort of system change that you could impact or focus your energy on, what would it be?
Schools.
Yeah, I was wondering if that was it.
Single best place.
Yeah.
6 hours a day, 5 days a week, 180 days a year. Kids are captive.
Right.
Let's take advantage of it.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't.
What would you do?
I would. Well, I'm gonna describe.
Do it.
No, I'm gonna describe. So we've actually partnered with Surrey School District, biggest school district in the province, 84,000 students, 200 languages.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a pretty diverse place. So we have submitted an application to the Public Health Agency of Canada Youth Mental Health Fund, and I think I mentioned earlier about mental health and some of the ways it's approached. So what they're looking for is to build more supports in communities, right? And so what we've done is we've come together, we've identified the mind-body disconnection. We've really focused in on that. And we want to build physical literacy hubs in every school to actually maximize movement and reconnect the body to the mind in we're going to focus on grade 6 and 7, so 102 schools.
Wow.
Yeah. So that sort of work where health can come in and be a good partner with education, and then other partners like community recreation and YMCA and other groups like that, where we can collectively work together. I think that sort of thing would be amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'm not the group I probably worry about the most is adults 20 to say 50.
Right.
Because nobody worries about them.
That's right. And they got kind of missed. They were
totally missed.
That group that it just got away from us.
Like, unless you have a big accident, you have a baby, you're not really involved, right? Because statistically, we're not worried about you. You're not going to generally die of anything, typically, but a lot of bad habits get seeded in there, right? And
you're working really hard. You're building your career. You're raising kids.
Absolutely.
You're buying stuff. Like there's a lot.
And
going
you're not
on.
taking care of yourself.
Yeah.
And I especially worry about moms who generally, give up stuff for themselves.
Put all their energy into all the other people.
Yeah. Now, there's lots of different programs out there, but I think it needs to be an area that we need to be more mindful around.
I love that you said that.
It just is, right? And it's like it's the whole population, and looking at, okay, we really need to do this here, and we could do this over here for sure. And it's different in every place, like with every group, right? It's just a little different. And we need to be open, and we need to be engaged, and we need to listen. What do you want? And then, you balance that with what you need, because, it's like kids, what do you want? Well, you also need some of this too. So there's got to be a little give and take. So it's interesting, right? When you look at that whole thing. And I think working with the population, working with older adults has been very satisfying. Why not have a great quality of life for the last 20 years of your life, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're living into the 80s. That's great and everything else. But what does it look like the last 10, 15 years?
Totally.
At the end of the day, my mom's turning 89 this summer, and she's bopping around pretty good. She's not driving anymore, but I'm pretty amazed. I'm going, yay, good gene pool. I like it. Works for me. But it's interesting when you see people around you and how things change and everything else. And then you see the tragic side. You see people who are dying way too young, or
Or just that quality of life. Like the last decade, one of the podcaster talks about, I can't even remember which one, but he talks about I think it's Peter Attia, that final decade.
Yeah.
And like, how do you want to live in that decade?
Yeah.
Because it can be wonderful or it could be miserable.
Yep. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Oh my gosh, we are out of time. I can't even I'm looking at my notes. I barely even looked down. This has just been an absolutely fascinating conversation. I am so excited about the work that you're doing, and I can't wait to have you back to learn more because there's just so many things that we didn't get to today that we could get to. But you've outlined it as generally as you possibly can. And I also think that there's some good takeaways for people who are listening that are really, that's the great thing about the people that listen to this podcast is that on some level, there's a genuine interest in health.
Yeah.
Right. And so there's some really practical little nuggets in there for people to take away with.
Yeah.
And so I think we've won just on that front. However, I'm going to ask you a couple more questions.
You bet.
And you sort of touched on this a little bit, but what is your biggest hope for the future of physical literacy in Canada? This is a big question, probably could be a whole podcast.
That we can get it more entrenched in policy.
Yeah.
When it becomes policy, then it has a changing component. It can be prioritized in a different way. I think I'm not saying it's the only thing. I think it's one thing that needs to have higher priority because I think we benefit so much from it. So that would be probably my number one thing.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Okay. So you know that this is the Wealthy Podcast, our clever little play on words that health is wealth. And as you've really done a great job in outlining today, there are many aspects that make up our overall health, and physical health is certainly one of them. How has your definition of health or what constitutes health care changed over the years, or has it?
I think the way I look at healthcare is it is okay. I'm going to back up. The 60s, we determined as a country that we needed to take care of each other. I think it's one of the pivotal, important components in our history as a country. I value it as a value proposition as a Canadian, that we have a healthcare system that is for Canadians and supports Canadians. It was created to mitigate tragic financial calamity if something really bad happens, right? I think over the years, people have probably leaned on it a little too hard, like that it needs to be the cure of everything,
It has to hold everything.
Yeah. And so I think the idea that healthcare is there, to me, is a bit of a last resort, because usually when you're interacting with your hospital, it's not, it's
disease or injury.
Something's gone wrong,
yeah,
right?
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that healthcare can't be a champion also on the health side. And to me, what the foundation, Kelowna General Hospital Foundation, is doing here, investing in that health side, is really important, because I think that in combination with healthcare is a stronger model. When we have, just one sucking up all the oxygen, I think it can be more problematic for us as a population. But I think when we have a little bit more balance, I think it's a very powerful system.
So what areas of your health, again, recognizing that when we say health, we mean all of the things.
Yeah.
Do you feel you're wealthy?
Well, I turned 65 last year. And,
wow.
So
you look great.
Thank you. I I swam for an hour in Okanagan Lake this morning. I rode my bike for 90 minutes up a few hills yesterday. You know, I think the fact that I can still do all that makes me pretty wealthy at the end of the day. So I've been fortunate enough to have the opportunity in my life to build a value proposition around doing all that, and that it's important to me. So I think that that is, from the health side, is really important. And then of course, having really good connections, friends and family around you that, you know, you just always need, for sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right. The last word goes to you. Is there anything you'd like our listeners to know, something maybe we haven't covered, or just kind of a general message you'd like to leave them with?
Try and move every day in some way, whatever it is. Just move. Could be working in the garden, could be going for a walk around the block, could be going for a swim, could be anything. Go for a bike ride. But try and move every day. I think you will reap the benefits.
Amazing. Drew, this has been an incredibly exciting conversation for me to have. I just am so appreciative that there are people like you out there doing this work. I didn't even know that this was a thing. You know, I mean, I guess you sort of know it's a thing, but I didn't know it was an organized thing. And I love everything that you are doing. Keep doing it. And I can't wait to have you back and just hear more about how we're able to move the needle on this, because I just agree with you so wholeheartedly that this is the future of health care in our country, is this approach that is far more proactive than reactive. And you're fighting the good fight.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to come and speak with you today. I really enjoyed the opportunity and look forward to next steps for sure.
Thank you, Drew.